Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Steer. I'm the director of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, and I want to welcome you to the final closing session of the 2021 Budget Summit, our legislative panel. Before we begin that session, I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to thank you all for joining us today and over the last month. We hope you've not only learned a great deal, but have been motivated to roll back your sleeves and work with all of us, advocates for public policies that will break down barriers of class, race, and gender, and lift up all Pennsylvanians. And second thing I want to do before we get started is introduce the members of the staff of the Keystone Research Center and the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. I'll tell you their names and they will tell you what they do, but I want to start with three people who've done the most to make this event a success. As he has for many years, Jeff Garris took charge of this event and handled it with his customary skill and precision. There were many new challenges this year because of the Zoom format and the extended time frame of the summit. I think we can all agree he did a great job handling them. Jeff Garris.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thanks to all the folks who've made this such a great success. I'm the Outreach Director at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, where, among other things, I coordinate our campaign, the 99% Pennsylvania, working on advocacy on federal issues here in Pennsylvania and all of the other things we do at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. So thanks so much, Mark, for your kind words.
Second, I want to thank Stephanie Frank, who helps plan the event and handles much of the administrative work of the summit. Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Frank. I am the office manager for the entire KRC organization that includes PBPC and our various campaigns. So thank you for joining us.
And finally, I want to thank Adrian Stanley, who led us through the mysteries of the Hoopa platform that we're using this year and handles most of the back end of Zoom for us. Adrian.
Hey everybody, I'm Adrian Stanley, she, her. I am the Deputy Digital Director for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center.
Thanks to all of you for the great work you did. Now, they all had help with the whole staff, so we're going to introduce all of them very quickly. It's going to take a little longer than usual because I just discovered this morning we're up to 17 staff members. When I started 5 years ago, we were 6. First, Stephen Herzenberg, my boss, the Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center. Oops. He was supposed to give this title. He can do it. Steve here? Okay, if not, I'll go on to Lavana Leyendecker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lavana Leyendecker. I'm the Associate Director for the Keystone Research Center and the PA Budget and Policy Center.
Susan Gabreski. Steve Herzenberg, I believe he's here.
I don't quite know where I was, but I've now been let in. Risk. Steve Herzenberg, Executive Director, Keystone Research Center.
Thanks. Susan Gabreski. Okay, she's our Senior Advisor. Now onto the communication staff. Kirsten Snow.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Snow. I'm the Director of Communications for the PA Budget and Policy Center and the Keystone Research Center. And I have the distinct pleasure of communicating to all of you all of the great stuff we're up to.
Thanks. Erica Freeman.
You're muted, Erica.
Sorry. I'm Erica Freeman, and I am the Deputy Communications Director, and I work under Kirsten and with Adrian.
Thanks. Now on to the organizing and campaign staff, Kadita Kenner.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kadita Kenner, Director of Campaigns for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. This is my 5th summit, so happy to be here and happy to be with the We the People and Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania campaigns.
Katie Personette.
Hi, everyone. Katie Personette here, Deputy Director of Campaigns with Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, and I'm celebrating my 1-year anniversary of being with the organization today.
And most of the people haven't met her yet in person. Ricardo Almodovar.
Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Almodovar, Organizing Associate for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. He, him, his pronouns. I currently live in Lancaster City. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Now onto the policy analysis and research staff. They don't often get in front of the camera, but everything we do is dependent on the work they do. Diana Polson, our senior policy analyst, cannot be here today, so I'll go on to Claire Kovach.
Hi, my name's Claire, and I'm a senior research analyst for the Keystone Research Center.
Thanks, Claire. Mason Murtaza.
Hey everyone, my name is Mason Murtaza. I'm a research associate for the Keystone Research Center.
Nathando Thandawi.
Hi, my name is Nthando, and I'm a budget and policy analyst with the Pittsburgh Budget and Policy Center.
Thaddeus Hill.
Hi everyone, I'm Thaddeus Hill, and I'm currently an intern with the Keystone Research Center.
And finally, our affiliate education voters PA, Susan Spica. I'm not sure. Susan here?
I don't see her on yet, but we did get Susan Gabreski.
Okay, Susan Gabreski, you can introduce yourself.
Mark acknowledged me. I'm a senior advisor working on democracy issues, working with Steve on Reimagine Appalachia.
And that's it. I want to thank this great staff for doing so much good work, that behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, everything this summit did was created by this whole staff. Now that you met the staff, I want to introduce Corinna Wilson, the president of Wilson 500. She specifically asked me not to give her a long introduction, and that's good because it could take a very long time if I went into all the great things she's done. But she's a great friend of the organization, and we're happy to have her join us once again as the moderator of this panel.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much for everyone attending virtually. Again, I hope to be here next year in person, and I hope I'll see you here next year in person too. Thanks to the PBPC for having me, and thanks to my old friends at PCN for airing this. It's an important conversation that Pennsylvanians should be hearing. So thank you, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. And in no particular order, I'll start with, and I will not give bios. Everything is linked on websites. Everyone's available. You can look up and see their backgrounds and their committee assignments and all of that. I'm just going to do names because I think we want to get to hearing from them. So starting with Representative Elizabeth Fiedler, Representative Sara Innamorato, Representative Rick Krajewski, Representative Chris Rabb, and Senator Katie Muth. So with that said, let's start with Representative Fiedler. And if you each would take 3 minutes, and I'll time you, but I'm not going to be too strict with you, maybe 3 minutes, and talk a little bit about the people's budget and your other legislative priorities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is so just incredibly exciting to be part of. So thank you to everyone on staff and everybody in the community who has been involved both in what's going on and also looking forward and sees hope, sees possibility in the Pennsylvania budget in a way that I think may not have felt so deeply a couple years ago. So I have started a timer, but I'm a former radio reporter, so I'm going to see if I could stick to the 3 minutes by myself. I will try. So I'm State Rep Elizabeth Fiedler, proud to represent South Philly. And really, I am in my second term. So state house terms are 2 years, if you don't know. So I'm in my third year. And one of the things that has been so striking to me just in my short time in Harrisburg is the budget. And I feel like Mark and a couple of folks on this call and I have been talking about this for quite a long time, just how much of the budget happens behind closed doors, how little we know as regular people about how these massive amounts of tax dollars, our tax money in many cases, sometimes federal funds, how they're spent, how the decisions are made, and whether those things really line up with the priorities that our families and our neighborhoods and our communities have for how our tax money and the federal dollars are spent. So I see this very first big sort of people's budget project as building on the work that's been done in the past by people, elected officials before us, PBPC, many community groups across the state. This is a coming together. It's a coalition, right? It's the beginning of something that I think when we get to next year, we're going to say, wow, we started with those baby steps, but it was great that we did it, right? Not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good on this. Because honestly, we know there is a long way to go. I get to sit on the Appropriations Committee, which is the budget committee in the State House, and it is awesome. It is a big time commitment, but I love it. It's a great chance to spend a bunch of time with our state budget, learn how tax dollars are spent and how priorities are set. And one of the things that has been so clear to me is what I just said, which is how much is done behind closed doors, how much is done just in these other conversations and not in the light of day. And there's not enough community input. There's not enough, what do the people of South Philly want? What about the people in Allentown? What about education, right? That's something that I hear about all the time in my district. And I know many of my colleagues do on this call as well. So really pushing the priorities of our constituents, the people we hear back in our neighborhoods. We're having co-hosting policy committee hearings, and we've had a couple already, looking to have some more. Really excited to work with the Senate on those. And then also the events that PBPC is having. I see this, like I said, as a first step. It's not the end, but trying to shine a light and give people more of a chance to have a say and to build community and decide how tax dollars are spent. So just really excited to be here with you and really appreciative for all the work that's been done to bring us to this point.
That is a radio pro for those who came in on time perfectly. Representative Innamorato, you're up.
You're muted,
Gotta
Sarah.
mute Sarah.
You think you would learn after doing this for more than a year. We always unmute. I was saying thank you all for having me. And as I launched my timer on my phone, not to be outdone by Rep. Fiedler, my mom texted me and said she just received her COVID vaccine shot. So, for many of us, it has been a dark time and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And, that's as legislators on this panel who are really involved in our community, we know how hard people have been fighting for more, fighting just to survive. It's been quite a dark time, and we've been very good at resisting things, but it's about time we can point to something that's informed by the community that's closest to the pain and suffering in the form of this people's budget to say, hey, we don't have to just resist anymore. We can actually have a document that is reflective of our morals and values as people have come together to fight for justice and equity and fairness in our governing process. And really, in partnering with the policy committees that we have both in the House and the Senate, it's afforded us a platform to really co-govern, to really bring the voices of the people who are doing the work on the ground to, well, not necessarily the halls of Harrisburg this time, but to the Zoom rooms of Harrisburg, and talk about what is really important and how to our communities and how we prioritize that as legislators. And, I think the other important side of the coin is not only how we appropriate this money, because people do really love the government to spend money on schools and roads and public safety and all of those things that are great, but it's how do we get that money, right? And is our tax system actually fair? And, Ben Franklin said nothing in life is certain except death and taxes. And to say the T word is really, it's not welcomed in Harrisburg, but I think it's something we really have to talk about, because if we can't talk about it, we can't talk about who actually funds the services that the state provides, right? And when you start to peel back, you see that, corporate profits are growing, so is inequality. But when you look at who actually pays for the budget that we appropriate, it's mostly working families. And, if we can't have that dialogue and we can't be critical about how much money is coming in from corporations versus how much money is coming in from our households, and, what if looking at our tax system and seeing that the lowest income people are the people who are paying the highest proportion of taxes in our Commonwealth, we can't actually begin to propose solutions to address that. So, right now we're thinking about how do we create a tax system that's actually fair, but also in the spirit of a post-COVID world and strong economic recovery, how do we create a tax system that's good for good for recovery. And so it's one that suppresses inequality, one that gives more money into the hands of the folks who are going to go out in the economy and spend it, and actually centers the priorities of our people and communities. So thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Representative Krajewski, welcome to, this is your first time on this panel, so welcome and welcome to Harrisburg. And it's your turn.
Thank you, Corinna, and thank you to the rest of the PA Budget and Policy Center team for your work on this issue leading up to this point and for having us on this closing plenary. For those that don't know me, my name is Rick Krajewski. I'm the state representative for the 188th district in West and Southwest Philadelphia. And when it comes to my stake and my investment in developing a people's budget, I have a lot of reasons that are similar to the ones already shared by my colleagues. One, coming from my background as an organizer, as a community organizer, to me, collective action is always the route that we should strive for. We should always strive for a process, whether it's with budgets, legislation, campaigning, where we're involving people, we're empowering people, we're allowing them to take on leadership, and we're using the opportunity to politically educate them about things as well. And so to me, the people's budget is just such a prime and exciting opportunity to do that, because it is literally the document that determines how our government runs for an entire year. So what could be more empowering than us bringing this information to our districts, to our constituents, to our communities, so they can have a better understanding of where our money goes, where your tax dollars go, and where they should be going, where there aren't currently. So I'm really invested in this project because I think it can be a really awesome organizing opportunity and a way for people to just become more participatory in the budget process generally. And then the second thing that really comes up for me when it comes to my excitement about this is the fact that we are advocating for a people's budget, and there are people that resoundingly want the things that we're striving for. In my district, right, three of the biggest issues that come up often, one is education and the state of our education funding. So because we don't have often the robust funding that we need and deserve on the state level, my district and my constituents have to deal with the mercy of their socioeconomic status. So you can have one school that is well supported and well funded because of its tax base or because of what university it's next to, but then you walk 20 minutes and suddenly you're at a public school that's been divested from for years, doesn't have the kind of healthy conditions or funding that it deserves. And we have an ability to change that. We have an ability to change that by determining that education funding and fair education funding should be a budget priority, not just for this year, but permanently moving forward. We deal a lot with housing in my district, not having enough affordable housing, not having enough investment in affordable housing, but also protections for people, whether it's renters, whether it's working class homeowners trying to deal with mortgage relief. And again, I think we have an opportunity to invest in those things as part of a budget, just to continue to develop our social safety net for people, so they don't get caught up. And then the last thing I'll say that has really been a problem, I think for honestly our entire city in Philadelphia, and we're really wrestling with, is how do we address violence? How do we address people feeling threatened by violence? And to me, the answer is actually investing in our communities, investing in our social services, investing in mental health, in schools, in good paying jobs that pay a livable wage, that pay a working wage, so that we can start to break the cycles that can create cycles of violence anyway, or in the first place. And again, I think having an intentional investment in those programs, in those social services, in the structure of the capital P public is one of the ways that we can be preventative about violence and also just have lift people out of poverty. I think these things are no-brainers. When we poll people throughout Pennsylvania, whether it's having better funded schools, having healthcare for everyone, having a livable wage, having a clean and healthy environment, there's resounding agreement for it. There's resounding agreement and desire for these kind of things. And so I think that just really lends the final point to why it's so important, and why I'm excited to be part of a people's budget. So with that, I'll wrap it up and say thank you again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Representative Rabb, you are next.
No pressure. I first want to thank everyone for this moment, for this event, and for this opportunity to conspire publicly and unapologetically in the best sense of the word. This is where the magic happens, and it's really emblematic of something bigger than any one particular piece of legislation or subject matter. This is about transparency. This is about accountability. This is about fairness. This is about fairness. Just the notion that there are stakeholders here who embrace a people's budget is radical. It shouldn't be, but it is. And you know, the etymology of radical is, you know, the root, right? What are the root causes for these systems of oppression, which we must help dissolve and turn into shared prosperity? This is a powerful moment, and we're seeing some glimpses of hope in the Biden administration, but on the state level, we have a responsibility to act. All of us who have spoken thus far, who are members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly, are in the minority. And it's easy to just kind of hurl rhetorical bombs at the folks who are putting forth fascistic and otherwise extremist policies, but to actually forge ahead with a collective vision of what success looks like that transcends how Wall Street defines it, that transcends what's best for the economy. That's like saying what's best for the weather. It's not about what's best for the economy, it's what's best for communities, and how we choose to define those communities, and making sure that everyone who is connected to one ascribed community or another feels the same sense of belonging and connectedness as the most privileged amongst us. And that's across all the subject matters that have been mentioned beforehand: healthcare, housing, employment, education, childcare, the environment, infrastructure, restorative justice, and of course, community safety. These are issues that are intertwined. So many of these issues are not talked about explicitly because of the political climate and the power dynamics that exist in Harrisburg. But everyone, my colleagues, my newest colleague on the call, Rep. Krajewski, and the folks who returned for their second term are leading these conversations, are creating pathways for opportunity and discussion. They're not waiting for seniority. They're not waiting for permission. They're doing it, and they're making our institution so much more powerful and inclusive and productive. And to me, these processes, these ideas and visions are exactly what leadership looks like. And it's, to me, it's representative of the change we need. And I'm so pleased that I have these types of reinforcements in Harrisburg. It's been lonely as an unapologetically progressive public servant. And now I'm in such great company with badasses who are doing the work and are not just putting forth good legislation, but are translating it in meaningful ways, reaching people where they are, bringing people on board on the front end with intentionality and grace and humanity. And we have to walk the talk, and that's what I'm seeing due to the great collective energy of my colleagues in both the House and the Senate, including Senator Muth. So that's my piece. I don't know if I was 3 minutes, but I hope that fits in nicely.
Thank you. And Senator Muth, it is your turn.
Thank you very much. Tough acts to follow, but certainly the warriors that I rely on in the House. I've made phone calls to many of these individuals during tough votes, moments in the Senate where I certainly was standing alone, not sure, how not to cave to pressure to not fold into the norm. And so I just want to say thank you, because each one of these people have taught me something to fight harder for, and they're incredible, and I'm lucky to work with them. I also want to say thank you to everyone here, Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, We the People, Why Courts Matter. You provide such resources for us as legislators, and even prior to my election, you were the resource I went to figure out what the hell goes on with state government. So kudos, thank you. You've made this, an advocacy platform to, totally ignite public awareness, which is a lifelong Pennsylvanian. I think this week I've said 3 times I've lived here my whole life and had no idea how bad X, Y, and Z was, or whatever the thing is. And so when you talk about a state budget, it's a moral document. It prioritizes our, what we stand for, or it should. We live in a corporate state. And one of the things I read this morning was how horse racing is a dying industry, and it's time to put it out of its misery. I think in an Enquirer article, and I just opened it because I often had Chester County colleagues tell me you can't go against, horse racing because you have horse breeders in your district. You won't get reelected, and I'm like, that's like 5 farms in my district. Like, I don't think they can vote me out of office, but we've given them $3 billion in tax subsidies. And so when you think about that, you think about the number of subsidies we've given to the fossil fuel industry that we actually end up paying more for. And you sit back and think, like, that whole claim of fiscal responsibility from those that hold majority power is a load of garbage, and they serve special interests. And so I'm lucky to, be with these other state reps today that we don't serve special interests, and we've done nothing but fight like hell for the people. And that's what they deserve. Public representation should be someone who's fighting for you and your family. And right now that's not how it is. And instead we have COVID-19 showing us all of the vulnerabilities and wounds and weaknesses that existed pre-COVID. And, hungry people, they can't go get food, at the stock market or on Wall Street. That's not how this works. And so as we fight this battle, it's a battle of also having the knowledge to fight back against the propaganda and actually pass a budget, or at minimum in the minority, advocate for the budget that we really want. And that takes tremendous energy. It's much like a marathon. It's not a sprint. The budget process is months long. It's a trade list of deals of, we're going to run your bill for that bill. And I think that when you're on defense, there's some ray of hope moments where you might be able to get some traction on some issue. And, we have to multitask. We're decades behind where we need to be as a state. Pennsylvania's population has decreased so much that we're going to now lose another congressional district. Back in the 90s, we had over 25 or 24 or something. So people are leaving here because they don't have clean water to drink, and they don't have clean air to breathe. And, those are basic functions of life that if you can't have those, you're not going to stick around very long. And we need a tax structure that generates revenue for this Commonwealth that's more sustainable and fair. And that's why the fair share tax plan and closing the Delaware loophole, those should be easy priorities, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. Unfortunately, they're not. And we're still fighting for those things. But instead of relying on sin tax and horse racing and all of these things for alleged revenue, we should have a more stable system that puts Pennsylvania in a place where not just our economy is stable, but those living here are stable economically. And, we can multitask. So there's some great legislation. I don't know, let's end the death penalty. It's also a humane thing to do, and it saves the state a lot of money. Let's end mass incarceration. Wow, that'll save us a lot of money from the general fund going towards prisons. And so we could then maybe fund education and, have drinking water, just basic things that other states are doing. And instead of Pennsylvania doing the same old, which is stand up for special interests and corporations and allow, this beautiful Commonwealth to be polluted and contaminated. And it doesn't have to be that way. So as we head into this budget, it'll be a battle. There's a lot of money coming here to Pennsylvania from the feds. Probably we'll never see anything like this again. And I keep hearing that over and over. And then there's the part of me that's like, God, I hope we don't blow this. So we really have to stay on point, right? Stay on point even with our own Democratic leadership and making sure we're communicating with with folks and stakeholders like the PA Budget and Policy Center and say, like, what is the best pathway forward for X, Y, and Z plan? How do we transition Pennsylvania into a clean, green, safe place to live and work, and bring in new industry that's going to respect our Commonwealth and the people that live in it? And so I'm excited. It's a fight that we have no choice but to win. And so I'm pumped to be alongside these warriors and fighting for a moral budget. And thank you again for having me today.
Thanks to all of you for very moving, eloquent statements. And not to distract from the job at hand, which in this season in Pennsylvania is always the budget. But I do want to say there's an elephant in the room, and that is, what we saw on January 6th, right? And that there was the clearest threat to our democracy. Now, here we are in Harrisburg, or virtually in Harrisburg, and your state legislators. But what can you do? What are you doing to help ensure that we never get that close to the brink again, and that we address some of the causes of what happened that day? And we'll start again. I hate to go in order and make it so rote, but there's so many. So maybe Representative Fiedler first.
Maybe we can go in order this time and in reverse next time. I want to make sure Senator Muth gets to have the first word sometimes too. So the events that you described, I remember very clearly watching them. My 3-year-old came upstairs and just kept saying, "What's going on? What are they doing?" And I couldn't even, I think like a lot of people I've spoken to, I struggled to even find the words to describe what was happening, right? Just the size of it, the emotion of it. It was terrifying in many ways. It's still hard to process. I know that, like, speaking about very specific things, some of my colleagues who serve in particular on the state government committee have been part of quite a few hearings that have been held. 14, maybe someone else is going to know the exact number. I think it's 14 that that Seth Grove, as Chairman Seth Grove, is holding right now. And so it's, Republican held hearings and crafted hearings that are trying to spin a certain sort of narrative, trying to claim that, motives or lack of motives, trying to sort of spin things that are different from reality. And many of our colleagues who serve on state government committee and also people who've spoken on the floor have been quite direct in pushing back on that, right? On calling things out when it's not true, and stating the facts. And so I want to give a lot of credit to those people who serve on that committee and on other committees that have similar bills that really attack fundamental voting rights, democracy, that question the results of an election that we know was held fairly. There was not massive voter fraud, for example. Things that we are doing in Harrisburg. I think that it really does, I'll say this and then I'll pass it to Rep. Innamorato, because I know we all have a lot of thoughts. There is a lot to be said for shining light on what's happening and making clear to our colleagues and to leadership that people are watching. They are paying attention. And before I served as a state rep, I was a reporter for 11 years at WHYY. And I have to say that during that time, it wasn't like people weren't, "Oh, what's going on in Harrisburg? Like, what's happening in Harrisburg? Did you hear about this bill that they're considering?" Right? There wasn't as much attention on state government. And our colleague Rep. Rabb may have some thoughts since he served before us as well. I think the increased focus on state government, people are watching, they're writing to their lawmakers, they're calling, they're on social media. Hopefully we get back to a place where people can gather in the rotunda or at least on the Capitol steps, right? Calling people and making clear that you are paying attention and that your voice deserves to be heard, and you're not going to, as Rep. Rabb said, sit there and wait for something, right? We came to work. People came to pay attention. They're not just going to sit there quietly and let government churn out whatever it's going to churn out. So I think that there's a huge role for advocacy, outreach, and just calling people out or questioning their actions when you don't like what they're doing and they're your elected official. So I'm going to turn it to Rep. Innamorato because I know she has a lot of insight on this as well.
I think I've, like Rep. Fiedler said, is grappled with what is my role as citizen and what is my role as legislator in, helping to, I guess, reunite or unite our country. And I think as citizen, right, citizen, it's on all of us to have those conversations, as difficult as they may be, with people who are close to us. As a legislator, I think it is around rebuilding trust with government. I think the erosion of trust from the public to the government is something that feeds this discontent and allows for the proliferation of false narratives. I think that there's, it starts with a kernel of truth, right? There are state agencies that have let people down. We've seen that with the DEP and DOH with the AG's report. We've seen it with the widening inequality and creating an economy that favors corporations over working people. And so, I think as a legislator, it's around acknowledging the harms we've done, not only to working people, but how we've allowed for systemic issues of racism and xenophobia and misogyny to exist within our policies. And if we can't first acknowledge that, we can't work to heal and rebuild. And so as I think about pursuing legislation, I think about dialogue, I think about acknowledgement, I think about humility, and I think about building up those conversations as hard as they may be, because at the end of the day, I represent, I make decisions that impact everyone in this Commonwealth. So, it is my duty to hold those hard conversations.
Representative Krajewski.
Yeah, I'll try to keep my comments fairly brief. I think to me, the answer is pretty straightforward, which is that what happened on January 6th, I think, and even what we saw in terms of the event that happened in Atlanta, right, with the shooting, this is all the manifestation of white supremacy. And what happens when we have a culture of white supremacy that has been pushed forward in tandem with divestment from a lot of communities, including like a lot of white working class communities, right? Like there are people who have been divested from, who have dealt with stagnant wages, lack of mental health support, and simultaneously our society has used a rhetoric of white nationalism and supremacy to say that the fault of that is it's immigrants, it's Black people, it's marginalized people, it's vulnerable people. It's not that our structure has systematically defunded things to the point of failure, or to the point of really failing people. And so I think to what Rep. Innamorato said, like thinking about those systems when we legislate and thinking about how legislation can push back against that is so important. And then also just speaking to it and calling it out and creating a different way. And I think a people's budget and like this whole process is an example, is an opportunity to do that too.
Representative Rabb.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said before. I had warned someone, an immigrant from Ghana, not to go to Washington, D.C. Because I feared something might happen, and lo and behold, the insurrection happened. And I really desperately wanted to be wrong about my gut, but I felt there was a reckoning coming that was inspired by what Rep. Krajewski talked about, which is white supremacy. And it is the founding principle around the fragile democracy that we are trying to keep together and improve upon. It's stolen lands with stolen labor. That is the founding of this society, and yet despite all the financial wealth that has been created on the backs of so many who are not there to benefit the most, we have this narrative of scarcity that pits people against one another. And we have to push back against that. And it's not about being against hate, it's being more specific. It's calling it out for what it is. It is white supremacy and heteropatriarchy and all of these things. We have to use these big fancy words and reach people in all of these communities, not just speaking to the choir, but going outside of our own comfort zones and reaching people. And that's why I talk about reparations. It's one of the most controversial things you can talk about. And I try to create these opportunities for discussions with groups who are uncomfortable with the subject matter. I did it with middle schoolers, and I've done it with nuns and senior citizens, and I will do it with whatever group I can, because if we don't talk about the origins of these systems of oppression, we're not able to really come up with systemic solutions and to cross the barriers that have been put up to keep us apart. And when you're talking about something as whether it's the tipped minimum wage, right, $2.83, and you have a QAnon loving white single mother with a GED working at Denny's in South Central PA, and she's against all of these things, but she's also doesn't believe she should be earning a poverty wage. She needs to know that the reason she's earning that poverty wage is not because of undocumented folks or Black folks in cities or this or that. It's because of slavery. The legacy of slavery has created that sub-minimum wage that has allowed her to fester in poverty unnecessarily, and that our fates are intertwined. But we cannot acknowledge that our fates are intertwined unless we talk about the root causes for all of these isms that keep us down. And these are difficult conversations, but you know what's more difficult? Trying to justify returning to normalcy, which is inherently inequitable and inhumane. So when we get past this pandemic, we get in a post-vaccination world, it is not about back to normalcy and using the same coded language and avoiding these difficult situations. It's about addressing them straight on, because if we don't, we've done a real injustice to our roles as public servants and to community stakeholders who do care very deeply about shared prosperity.
Thank you. Senator Muth.
I'll be super brief because the high points have been hit, but I think when we talk about this, there's this argument that's ongoing of patriotism and what we think of being a patriot and fighting for our freedom, and those are what some say are Republican words or far right stolen words, in my opinion. And so there are still people in this country fighting for their freedom and have never been free. And so what we saw was an absolute act of white supremacy, and there was a failed leader inciting that type of violence, that type of insurrection. And, we have to combat that, even still in the Senate now, as we have, members that still, preach from the podium there that what they believe is right and just, and it's just not. And so sometimes this is tedious, as Rep. Rabb mentioned. You're going to have to do a lot of explaining over and over and over again, and you do have to meet people where they are. And the first way, there's some people who are never going to get quote unquote on our side or get to understand this, and that's okay in some manner, in that most people can build empathy, but they need to learn some information and then talk about their own experiences relative to why things are the way they are now. And that just requires a lot of hard conversations. You can't put it on a mailer. You can't put it on a Facebook ad. I mean, there was so much misinformation as well. Social media is great, but there's also the part of social media that can spread propaganda pretty quickly. And, we have to just be constant truth tellers. And sometimes those conversations aren't comfortable, even if they're with your own family or your own circle of whoever. And, there is no choice. This is save our democracy. Try to make this country what it could and should be instead of what it has been. And sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, is, you know, what my dad sometimes used to say to me. And I'm like, well, maybe COVID and all of this is rock bottom. And the way we build back up is to make sure that it is equitable, that we end these injustices, that we work to do that because they've magnified them. I don't know how well we're succeeding in that thus far, as we see that there's frontline workers, mostly women and people of color, that still aren't vaccinated. So I think that's a fight we're still in the middle of. And so that goes back to exactly the whole, you know, insurrectionist theme of white supremacy. And so it is a constant daily lesson of pushing yourself to do better, as well as educating those around you. And so you just got to be a truth teller and be ready to engage in that no matter what.
Thank you. And I'll take Representative Fiedler's suggestion, and we'll start with Senator Muth. We are getting questions from viewers, from attendees about education. I mean, I've been in Harrisburg for 25 years. I didn't have kids when I started this work, and now my youngest is almost a senior in college. It's the same conversation. The fairness and equity of the allocation of funding, the amount of funding. Now we have charter schools and cyber charter schools and some of the many issues that they raise. So I guess I'm throwing a big, wide open question out to all of you about what's the strategy? How can we make it better for the next generation of kids? And we'll start with Senator Muth. And it's a short-term memory test. We'll see if you can remember the backwards order.
I think what we need to remember is the historical gutting of funding and how that has put us so far behind. And so we've seen, you know, the majority party, either when they have the governorship or now in the legislature, and have for over 20 years, we haven't made it back from that. And so we're in such a deep hole. Layer in the property tax issue with the areas where school districts are underfunded. I have 12 school districts in my Senate district, so I'm very, very familiar with the array of combinations that occur from this. And that charter piece is draining the school's ability to stay solvent, especially now during COVID, as more families chose, you know, cyber charter, you know, charter schools during this time. And so, you know, education is, whether it's traditional in terms of going to college or trade or whatever, education should be an available lifelong resource. It shouldn't just be like, oh, I graduated college and that's it. You should be able, as Representative Innamorato is doing a class that she tells me about online. And so you should be doing that. And so, but you can't if it's not funded well, and you can if you can't afford it. And so, we could afford to fund our schools correctly. The majority party chooses not to. And so this is a big leap, but it's actually one of the ones that if we just reinvested dollars, even from the general fund, and just, you know, reprioritize the way it should be, this is achievable. So charter reform is, again, one of those multitasking easy ones, is that it's a guaranteed savings for every school district. And so that to me seems to have some traction, maybe because of COVID and some of the budget struggles, but it's also my understanding that charter reform language that was agreed to by some entities will likely be amended into a really crappy voucher EITC bill. So God forbid we ever just, like, you know, do something right, we have to mend it in with something horrible. So that we should all just be aware of, right, is that this battle continues, and it's still a battle of special interest. Charter schools are huge donors. You know, we have to be mindful of the pay to play in that piece too. But I don't have kids, and I want every single person, every single kid in this Commonwealth to have the access to a good education. That includes being able to eat meals at school. That includes being able to get after school help. I was raised by a single dad. You know, there were resources after school that could help me with math. I'm terrible at math and algebra specifically. But, you know, it's like those should be a given, right? Those should be a given, and that should be everywhere. And so despite having one of the wealthiest Senate districts in the state, I still have underfunded school districts in areas that shouldn't be struggling the way that they are. So this is a prioritization of funds, you know, tax the rich, close the loopholes. Like, there's money to fund this. And it's not to say it's that easy, but if we had the majority power, it would be a pretty, we could fix this.
Representative Rabb.
So I have the interesting distinction of representing a majority Black district in Northwest Philly that includes one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the state, Chestnut Hill, which is the origin of the term white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So a sociologist at the University of Pennsylvania studied white people in my district some 60 years ago and came up with the term WASP, studying my white people. And if you go to the main public school, Jenks in Chestnut Hill, you would think it's a majority Black and poor district, which speaks volumes about educational access in our country, in our state. We have education apartheid in Pennsylvania. That is the norm and has been the case for some time. We do not have the political will to change that because as it stands, it privileges certain school districts, and no one wants to go home and say, hey, guess what, folks, I brought home less money. Until we create a bigger pie and put education as a true priority for our society, nothing's going to change. But it also has to be discussed in the context of racial justice, because all of these things are related. I mean, we had a state that was where slavery was the norm until 1780, and 75 years after that, the last Pennsylvanian was freed. But there were laws on the books in states all around our country that disallowed education, right? Made it a floggable offense to teach enslaved people to read or write, to flog white people for teaching the wrong people to read and write, and for my own grandfather, illegal to go past the 10th grade in the state of Mississippi. So when we talk about education and we understand its true power, we also have to understand that in providing what should have always been available, the birthright for everyone, is a deeply unsettling thing to people who have never had to worry about true meritocracy or competition, because there's never been that level playing field. And I think that scares a lot of people who have never had to worry or be concerned about real competition and a real plurality based on an educational system that's not based on zip code or the body you inhabit. And we have to be very real about what that looks like. So there are things on the table, there's legislation, but it's the narratives we create. And the last thing I want to mention around this issue that applies to any other issue you bring up, Corinna, is whatever your number one issue is, number two and number three have to be electoral reform and media reform, because who decides what the narratives are and who decides the means by which our elected officials are held accountable and are elected. All of those things matter, and it influences lobbyists, it influences all of these things. So no matter what your issue is, we have to talk about the narratives and all of the different forces that shape the work that we do. And that's the electoral reform and media reform.
Thank you. Representative Krajewski.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question and thinking particularly, about education funding, not just from K-12, but even including higher education, and really like how my generation, the millennial generation, has dealt with the fact that we have been, one, we're downwardly mobile, we're making less money, we have more debt. In my district, we have a lot of young people who, like myself, I don't have kids, but one of the things that I have to consider is, if I do have children, will I be able to send them to a well-funded public school? And if I do, and if someone does have kids, they still have the same worth. And all of this, you just have to ask yourself, like, what happened? What happened to our education system, where we are now no longer adequately funding our schools? We are making higher education more and more of a thing that is a privilege, and is a privilege that many people feel like they cannot afford. And how has that been individualized, and how specifically for like the Black and brown people, at what point did it come to be that we don't deserve well-funded good schools? I was fortunate that I got a scholarship program that allowed me to go to a school and then go to Penn, but all of my peers, like they didn't get that opportunity, they didn't get that privilege. And why? You know, why is it because of your race in your class, you're suddenly determined to be a have-not instead of someone who's a have? And I just think that we have a responsibility to fix that. I think we have a responsibility in our legislature to do something different, to say something different, and to send a message to our kids, to our young people generally, and with that I include young adults too, that like we are investing in our future, that whether you're a young person that's trying to go to college, like there's a pathway to doing so. And if you're a young person thinking about having children, or you have young children, that you're going to be able to send them to a well-supported, well-funded education system. And so for me, like there's a part that's about obviously looking out for my constituents in my district, but I also have skin in the game, and it's like I want to send my kids to a well-funded public school, and I feel like that's a thing that's untenable right now. So
Thank you. And I'm sorry to say, only have a few minutes left. So Representative Innamorato, if you could keep your comments to 2 minutes, and then we'll have 2 minutes left for Representative Fiedler.
Sure. And to Rep. Krajewski's point, right, we have a constitutional obligation to provide a efficient and fair and accessible public education for all students of this Commonwealth, and we're not fulfilling that mission. So I think the only point I want to add is that we've kind of touched on funding and how unjust and imbalanced that is, but I also want to bring up the point that if you put money into a broken system, it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. So while we do have chronically underfunded schools, specifically in majority Black and student districts that serve students of color, we also need to say, are we putting in money in a system that isn't thinking holistically about the needs of the students that attend that school? And if you look at where charters are prolific, it's not in the really well-funded public schools, right? It's typically in, again, majority, minority districts where there is a lot of charters, and people with money are always going to have the choice on where they want to move so they can send their kids to school. So we do also have to think about how we're reimagining public education and thinking through what those laws mean as we think about how we're equitably funding them.
Thank you. And Representative Fiedler, you had the first word and you will have the last.
Oh, thank you. So I'll keep it brief. I agree with my colleagues, absolutely. And I think just the fact that we've gotten to this point with the people's budget is a clear sign and illustration of what Rep. Rabb said. We are not waiting. We are not waiting for whatever the magic key is you get when you achieve some number of years of seniority. We are not here to wait. None of us ran for office to do that. And I think that for me ties in so clearly with education funding, because it's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous that so much of the funding goes through something that is not the fair funding formula. It is ridiculous that the basic ed money is divided based on statistics, demographics that are not a current reflection of the state of Pennsylvania. There's a presentation that's done by a great person who's a constituent of mine, where he talks about LeBron James. When LeBron James was this age, these are the demographics that we're pulling from, right? This is a time in the past. This is a snapshot in the past, and we're basing our current ed funding on it. It doesn't make sense. Even my 3-year-old gets that. It is clear. And I think all of us are committed to pushing on this and to making clear also that it is a problem in Philadelphia. Absolutely, no question. But it's a problem across the state, right? And I think there's often this polarization and this incorrect narrative that is pushed by people in Harrisburg that Philly is to blame for this. It's really Philly's fault. This is a problem across the entire Commonwealth. So I think also bringing out those numbers is something that people on this call have done, our colleagues have done, and look forward to working with Budget and Policy Center and everybody on this call to, hopefully next year we'll be on this summit and we'll be able to say man, remember when we funded our education system in that really messed up way? I'm glad we came together and pushed for that not to be the case anymore. So that's my word.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of the members who are with us today. We know how busy you are and how many demands there are in your time, and we're very grateful for spending it with us. Personally, I just want to say, after all we've been through as a state and as a country in the last few years, it is my privilege to be your moderator today. And I want to thank the PBPC for having me. And I'd like to toss it back to Jeff Garris. And thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Corinna, and thank you to everyone for joining with us today. I want to thank our legislators who are on this panel: Senator Muth, Senator Fiedler, Senator Innamorato, I'm promoting people here today. Representative Fiedler, Representative Innamorato, Representative Krajewski, and Representative Rabb. Thank you so much. Big thanks to you, Corinna, for moderating again in a very different way than we've done in the past. I want to thank all of my colleagues at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center for all the tremendous work over the last 4 weeks that we've been holding this 2021 Budget Summit online. I want to thank all of you who registered and attended. I also want to let you know that we would love to get your feedback as we wrap up this summit now at the end of this session. I've dropped in the chat there a list of a link to the online evaluation form. All of the sessions from the Budget Summit this year are available on that Whova app where you registered for the summit. We're also going to be putting them on our Facebook page. We're going to be putting them also on the PBPC website. And you'll be able to pick them up also on our YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much to everyone for making this summit a success. And we really do hope to be together in person in Harrisburg next year. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.